Welcome to the Coach's Corner of an Endurance Lab presented by TeamODZ. We've got a very, very special guest here today, and it's not Justin. We've got we have a very special episode here for you today. Midday, we rarely come to you guys during this time of the day, but we have got an interview that you are going to want to tune in. So we're going to get a couple shares out, but I would like to take the opportunity to introduce our guest. His name is Coach P, as they know at the Endurance Nation. Really good guy. We always see him at the back of the Wagner's wagon on Thursday, and you can always catch him. So if you ever fall off,
not
just
the front.
Exactly. That's right. He does a very special move where he attacks off the back, like he does with Chris Haskell. Taught him that early on, if you know him. But welcome and thank you, Coach P, for coming on board and dealing with our sidekicks and antics today.
Of course, always happy to do it. No worries. Well, except for Justin, but for you, I'll do it.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Hey now. So I want to introduce yourself and maybe tell the audience a little bit about who you are and tell us about the Endurance Nation.
Sure. Okay. Totally. So I'm an endurance athlete. I've been doing triathlons since 2001, and which is a long time. Over that time, I probably did it for about 4 or 5 years, and then I started coaching. After a few years, I realized I could make more money coaching than I could doing my job. So I was like, let's go full time. So I've been full-time coaching No Safety Net since 2007. Right about 2007, started Endurance Nation with my business partner at the time, Rich Strauss. And we basically fired all of our one-on-one clients and said it was the year everyone got Facebook, everyone got a smartphone, and we said, this is going to be awesome. We're going to have 10 million people join our triathlon club, and that didn't happen. So over the years, we've evolved.
Only 9,999,000. They got close.
Fortunately, we never got that milestone. I couldn't shoot off the confetti cannon. Now I just gave it to Zwift. They use it all the time. And so basically, we have anywhere between 500 and 750 members, depending on the course of the year. Athletes are from all over the globe, as far away as Japan, Australia, Italy, Ireland, and right here in the States. And they'll train for any sort of race. We started off with triathlon. Now we do, ultra cycling. People just do regular cycling. People will do just swim-only events, swim-run events, whatever they come up with. We give them training plans. They connect online, much like you guys connect online. They share the journey, and then they'll meet at the races themselves. It's kind of a neat concept, and it's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely, and that's great. So you guys, you guys have definitely have some great history. I think you have put some really groundbreaking things out as far as coaching is concerned. You know, obviously we have the Endurance Lab, and we're a newer group. Essentially started out at TeamODZ. But we have used a lot of the things that you have broken ground on to really connect with our riders, because we're in a different time where you don't necessarily need to be, we're in this virtual space. You don't need to be, one-on-one with these riders anymore. You can provide that service now, right?
Mm-hmm. Totally. And it was astonishing to me to realize that just how much value people get out of connecting with one another. That the collective hive mind is so much more powerful. I was tired of having the same conversation with 18 different people. But more importantly, I realized that if I had a conversation with you and Justin was listening, Justin learned the lesson too, but he also brought a new question to the table. So we were able to just evolve at a much faster rate.
Yeah, and I think community, definitely with our international team for ODZ, we learned quite a bit, whether it be in streaming, racing, training. This community thing really builds, and the virtual ability to connect, I think, is huge, and that's what you're definitely leveraging. So great. So that's the story behind that. And what we're here to talk about today for everybody is we're here to talk about INSCYD, INSCYD. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time first about kind of Coach's P, what turned him on to it, and then we can kind of talk a little bit about, what it is. So kind of just give us the rundown from the top, like where did it find that twinkle in your eye, and then go from there.
Sure. Okay. Absolutely. So as you mentioned, being a distributed community, one of the challenges we have is getting to know our athletes, not just the stories that they tell us that they are, but also just seeing the information and the data. And there's these days, when we first started out coaching in 2007, there was nothing. We didn't even have power meters when we first started. Watches were terrible. There was no shared data, right? Like practically faxing each other stuff. Now there's so much noise, it's hard to find the signal. So when I came across INSCYD, I said, well, this is fantastic. I get a chance to take some of this data, run it through a test, get actionable metrics out of it, be able to deliver more value to our athletes, and basically align the principles that we have for coaching, like just like with lab, best practices, but being able to take it and say, wow, instead of just saying, let's go, this way, I can say to you, we're going to go exactly to this address, right? It's like getting Google Maps for your fitness. So we get to zoom right in on that. It's awesome.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so what makes INSCYD different than, the names that we hear out there, the COG and the, all the other things? How does it differentiate on how you've trained your athletes from 2001 to now to 2020? This is what we're doing now.
Totally. Okay, great. So not too different from my maps analogy. Basically, we had best practices, lessons learned from the team, from my own training, doing research and so on that we brought in, and we would basically get a bunch of people. We would do a test, right? We say, hey, I need 10 volunteers. We're going to do this. Let's see what happens. Let's go. Over time, we've gotten smarter and better about that, just as a community of athletes, everybody. But now with the INSCYD testing, I can see exactly where you are right now. So in December in North America, everyone's supposed to be doing winter training. But some people are physically ready for winter training, and now that we're learning with INSCYD, some people have a very different objective in the winter to achieve. And so we can really fine-tune their direction, which has been fantastic. So it gives us an opportunity to say, be a part of the group, but you're going to walk these specific steps to be able to succeed. It's literally a roadmap to changing your fitness on the bike. It's phenomenal.
Absolutely. So how long have you been working with INSCYD now and kind of educating yourself with this and then rolling it out to your athletes?
Sure. So I started talking to INSCYD over a year ago. I've been back and forth and trying to get some sense of where it was. I've only just started really in the last 3 months doing the courses, going through, doing the first round of tests and all that information. So it's still fairly new to us as we go through the process. But we're, true Endurance Nation style, we're just jumping right in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as I understand it too, there is an IRL connection where you're bringing your virtual tests from INSCYD and you're bringing it to be able to implement in real life setting, right?
That's right. Yep. Mm-hmm. So one of the nice parts about INSCYD is that anybody can participate. You can just send, you can take the test, we get the data, and we can run it. So we've already had some athletes. We've had 2 athletes do it from Japan. And so the hardest thing is explaining all the terms that INSCYD gives you in Japanese. I'm working on that. A little rusty.
So disappointed. I thought you were fluent in Japanese too.
I know, right?
Just lowers in my mind every day even further. I know he speaks fluent Chinese because he rides when all the Chinese do on Zwift with us.
So no, it's been interesting. So we started, because inside Endurance Nation, again, I could do things one-off, but I'd rather do something together as a group. So we started something called Best Bike Camp. You can see it on our website, endurancenation.us, Best Bike Camp. And basically, we run classes. So there's a 4-week class. You sign up, you do the testing. You're in a group of anywhere from 10 to 15 athletes, and we'll give you the metrics, and we walk you through, sort of the core aspects of it we think are relevant, and then give you homework for each week. So, week 1, we talk a lot about a metric. I'm sure we'll discuss today, VLA Max. And when we get into that space, then we have people doing VLA Max workouts, understanding the numbers, comparing with one another, getting a sense of where they're at. It becomes a really helpful way to make them, give them more control over the change, and make sure that they're ready to move forward with it.
That makes sense.
That's all we're going to be doing in the live stream is comparing my VLA Max to yours, actually. We didn't tell them ahead of time. That's all we're going to be doing.
Oh,
Well, when we get down to the metrics, we'll definitely know who has the better of the 2 VLA Maxes because we'll figure out that number today. And I think it's going to be on Coach P's side if the science is with him. So
but the only test that talks about is the one where I'm winning.
Yeah, exactly. That's the only category that we're going to be talking about. Nothing else matters. All right. So I guess moving from there, obviously, a lot of you guys who tuned in on throughout the week with one of the several hours that all of us are online streaming, Justin did a test on Monday. So first I'll go over to Justin from his side as an athlete. How has this test been different than any other test that you've done before?
Yes, I think I always didn't like the 20-minute test, just a straight 20-minute FTP test. Like, it just sounded terrible to me, honestly. And I never would do them. I would just race hard on Zwift and whatever it came up with, be like, okay, cool, we're improving. Let's just take that and go. And I had seen the 4DP test from Sufferfest. I had seen that. And I think they're definitely in the same direction of what INSCYD's trying to do. Like they know like there's a lot more to your power curve than just one number. And we can drop. I was gonna find the YouTube link to drop in the comments of the test. If you want, if you can find the YouTube video, Jason, drop it in the comments. If people want to see the test of me suffering, we'll drop that in the comments. But what was interesting for me was, you know, PMAC challenged me to do it, and so I had to, you know, step up to the plate. And, you know, I mean, I couldn't let a triathlete challenge me and not. I mean, that was the real reason why I wanted to do the test. I mean, I wouldn't have done it otherwise. Let's just be honest, straight up front. So, but no, it was interesting. I knew it was going to be looking at more than just your long threshold. That intrigued me, but also the fact that there was very intelligent, high-level heuristic software analyzing the power. That came back to me like, hey, you know what? That's pretty interesting. That's pretty interesting. I don't see that. We'll get a little feedback from PMAC. And at least on my end, maybe not on JFlow side. So that was interesting for me, is that I knew there was a software algorithm that was going to be like crunching the numbers, right? And so I was like, okay, this is interesting, because that brought a whole nother thing to the table that I hadn't seen before. So for me, that was what I thought was really interesting, was, hey, there's this nebulous piece of software that I'm just going to submit the numbers to and see what comes back. And I was intrigued. So
yeah. And I think part of that conversation, oh, hold on. Let me take PMAC off. I think he muted himself. I think part of that goes back to Coach P, is, so where does this go? And where has it come from? Because obviously the performance power decoder test has come from somewhere. It's come from all the lab stuff that we all wish that we could do, right? From what I understand. Is that correct? Hold on. I think you're still on mute. There you go. There you go. So this has come from years and years of creating curves, power curves from lab tests. And you could even put some of that data in, I think you said, during our test. Wasn't that right?
That's right. Totally. So you can use the lab data, but if you've got an additional, you've got a different workout, or if you didn't like the minute test you did, or if you go out and do another session, you can just drop it in. Once you're inside a coach's system, you can easily get updated and move your numbers across the season, which is really valuable.
That's a good question. How often do we see riders taking this sort of test? I mean, a lot of times people do every 4 weeks, and it ends up being quite a bit for, you know, FTP anaerobic thresholds. But for an INSCYD test, how often would you have an athlete take it, for example?
I almost look at it as seasonal markers. So if people have their traditional, you know, base period, maybe they're working on strength, and they move to outside, they start working in the sprint. We think about a typical season. When you're making those transitions is important. So we start out baseline first of the year. We say, what's your goal this year? What do you want to do? What does the race look like? Are you you're going to be doing crits? Or are you going to be doing long distance racing? Doing lead build? So we'll set targets based off of that, and we'll check back in after the 3 months. Say you've done some base training. Where are you at? Right? We'll see all the different numbers. And with INSCYD, we get not just the traditional FTP in your VO2, but we can also look at that VLA max number as well. We can kind of see those numbers move independently. I think one of the neat parts about the data you mentioned earlier is that it's not just when it's just FTP. It's like everyone's like Cookie Monster, right? They're like, I just want more. Like, I want more FTP. Like, it's this today, I want 10 more. I want like more is always better. And with INSCYD and VLA metric, it's really interesting, right? You can maximize your performance for your event, and your FTP doesn't have to move too much for you to be in a better position.
Absolutely. And we see this. We see this with athletes, whether they're training, with a structured system, with a coach, or maybe with not. We see that in several different ways. So I think it's super important. And that kind of moves the conversation over to, what does the INSCYD test kind of look at? What are the markers that we're going to be looking at today? And then I could also bring some stuff up for the viewers, and you guys have it at home. You guys each have it, the results for Justin, but what kind of markers are we looking at for the INSCYD test?
Sure. Okay. So so people understand the test. There's 4 intervals. There's the 25-second sprint interval, 3-minute, 6-minute, and 10-minute interval, and they're all designed. They're not a typical interval. They don't want you to, take it too easy to start and build at the end. It's all, really hard work, and we expect power numbers sort of decline over time. We want to know about the time to get to each of those intervals done. And it's not. You can have it on Swift. It's fantastic. The test walks you right through the entire process. All the text on the screen, super. So the metrics that we look at, you get your traditional threshold power, your VO2. You get a percentage of your where you are in terms of your FTP and your VO2, what's the percentage there and the ratio there, which is really good for to know. And then we get this VLA max number that shows us a great deal of your, I would say, your athletic type based off of the training that you've system for the last 6 to 9 months. Where are you at? So if you've been riding long, COVID, I'm not really training, I'm just out doing all this endurance, that number's going to be a lot lower. Whereas if you're racing or living it up on Swift, or that's just your high-end energy side, then you're going to be higher on that number. And that's that other key metric that we start with.
Absolutely. So these are things that you, as riders at home, may not have heard of, but we're going to dive a little bit into it. And Justin's been nice enough to be able to put these numbers out. And these may or may not, no, they're really Justin's numbers. I was going to say that we were going to hide them, but these are Justin's real numbers from Monday. So I'll bring them up on the live stream here, and we'll get a chance to look at them, and then we'll kind of walk it through. So we can start from the top here, and we're looking at key metrics, and maybe you could take us through it. I'm looking at the key metrics section with VLA max and VO2 and FTP and all that. Coach P.
Sure, totally. All right, great. So we start off, let's go right to left. So everyone knows their FTP, where they're at. What I found that's interesting is that INSCYD, because it uses that power curve test, actually does a really accurate job of determining what your threshold power is. Most of us have a typically slightly higher number. You race and Swift, put out some numbers, and so you're like, that's my threshold. But I think a lot of us end up training with a number that's just a little bit higher than it should be. We take 95% of our 20 minutes, and most of us maybe can take 90%, be a little more accurate, right? If that's a power you should be able to sustain for an hour, not ride on TikTok, fall off your bike after 30 minutes, and be like, here I am, my hour. So definitely a little more accurate in that regard. Yep. And then we got our VO2 max. Everyone sort of understands what that is, and it's not. I don't look at that as a comparative metric. For me, that's a function of almost like your background as an athlete. The longer you've been training, the longer you've been doing racing, endurance work, and so on, just the larger that number is going to be. So you're not stuck. If you take a test and it says you're 42, you're not stuck at 42 VO2. It just means you probably recently got started training, or maybe just got into it as a new person. There's lots of room to grow in that regard. And then the third and final metric is that VLA max number. It goes from 0 to 1. I don't think you can really be at either end. But essentially that measurement is your maximum glycolytic power. So it tells you all the work you can do without any aerobic input. Where do you stand on that space? So, and that's what the 20-25 second test is for INSCYD. And that gives us a real sense where you are. So for athletes who can, in that short period of time, just throw down massive watts like you saw on Monday, those athletes like Justin, they're definitely much more higher on the glycolytic side. So they're really adept. Their body's great at just digging in and just grabbing glycogen and just blowing through it and doing work, right? Athletes who don't have those higher numbers, you can do, like me, you can do 800 and you're super happy with it. We're much more on the aerobic side. Intersection of that fitness, but in this case, this marker tells us just exactly where he sits. And that gives us some sense of where do you fit on the spectrum of sort of, high-end elite cyclist, or and with the shorter, faster work, or more on the endurance side, or perhaps even, sort of in the middle and more of an all-round. Those are the key numbers we look at.
Right. So then the number that we're looking at here, for example, Justin's number is 0.62 and mine's 0.85. I just wanted to point out that. So where does
he had to bring it up.
So it's not a good thing, obviously, because we're both going to be sitting around for the next 8 to 12 weeks leading this off. But what kind of rider characteristically are on each side? Because we are on one end of it, and I know a lot of our counterparts, let's say triathletes, are on opposite ends. So take us through kind of, as you said, like your goals, right? Let's say Justin's goal, like today we're going to talk about, his goal is still a cycling race and may not be a steady race. Like, So where do people like to be, on this gauge, on this scale now, this new scale that we're learning?
Totally right. And again, remember, it goes through the course of the season. So actually INSCYD has a great chart where they take a look at Andre Greipel's season from, I think, back in 2013. And you can see his different numbers, his VO2 and his threshold numbers sort of increasing throughout the course of the season as he moves across the year. And then you're watching that VLA number change. And so basically when he starts, VLA numbers high in the winter, but he's got to be able to stay in the group. He can't just, he doesn't want to get dropped, right? He needs to hang over the mountain so that he can do the sprint at the end. So he's got to develop that aerobic capacity. He's got to get that VLA max down. So he'll do a lot of VLA max specific work, sort of in that, I would say, the second quarter of the year. So first quarter's done, second quarter of the year. And then he starts bringing that number back up again as he starts to peak, because he needs to, now that he's got a lower VLA, he wants to get back up to that higher one, so he can be dynamic and explosive on the sprints. That's what we want. So if you're a great sprinter and you're doing a 5-hour race, but you're exhausted by the time you get to the last 500 meters, it doesn't matter, right?
Doesn't matter.
So that's the that we're looking for. So it depends really. I think part of the input is really important. I think what you touched on, which is, hey, what does the athlete want to do this year? Now we know where you're at. What are your goals? What do you want to do, right? And so there's definitely some Q&A in that space to learn more.
Absolutely.
And
So
one
as
thing I want to add to it, you'd asked me earlier, what was unique and different about this test? So, and I think this part I want to give back is actually really Coach P's like additional value add that he's adding on top of the test, because you get these numbers and these metrics, but like we're looking at a 5-page super detailed analysis of my zones, where I'm at, what I need to do to go to the next level, what my race targets are, like put some time into this, right? Like this is not just like he grabbed some numbers out of the software and then sent it back. Like totally like you need to be able to interpret those numbers and give them to the athlete. And that's exactly what Coach is doing here. It's kind of what he's trying to map this best bike camp around, is like there's a lot to be learned. Like honestly, when I first saw this, I was like, I don't understand half these terms. And so like I'm like learning from the camp, because it's like there's all these, I would say there's new terms, ways to describe things that are helping me learn the like I don't know the right word for this, but like the physiology necessarily behind like where the fuel sources come from and what that means, and how you adapt your training with that. These are things that they're new to me. And so I think this is also why INSCYD doesn't just sell the test to the end user, because the numbers by themselves will just, like, you could submit your numbers to some nebulous software that then comes back and gives you numbers, and you'd be like, I have no idea what this means. I don't know. Like, that's the whole point of coaching, right? Like, okay, your FTP is this, so what? Okay, we have you a number, but we need to know why and what. And so, he took feedback on what's my next goals, what's my objectives. Okay, we can run some simulations in the INSCYD software to say, if you focused on this, you would move this way. Or if you focused on that, you would move this way. Let's figure out where you're going to get your best bang for your buck in your training over the next set amount of time you have till your, till your event comes up. So, I mean, that's some pretty awesome stuff. Like, I have never had an analysis of my numbers like this detailed. So hats off. Literally, oops, that's disgusting.
Put that back
to feedback. We'll put that back on. So absolutely. So I guess this begs a conversation of, so with this, the exercise was Justin has a goal. We are trying to take a look and look at his numbers, and what kind of recommendations are we looking at him to do we're looking at 4.5 to 5 weeks. And let's say if it was double that time, how would that be different in his goals? But let's start with the short-term goal of trying to reach that. And then how would that differ if it was a further out?
Right, totally. So some of the changes, like making that change in VLA max, takes time, right? It's about consistency of work. There's correlation between, the first adaptation to it, and then once you start getting used to the type of training we do to reduce VLA max, then you can become more aggressive, right? You can expand the time you spend in that zone. You can start adapting your nutrition, as I know you've already started, getting a little more low carb, forcing your body to work on its own. That takes a great deal of time for that effect to happen. So in an ideal world, we've got 12 weeks to kind of tackle the VLA block and say, we're going to integrate this training depending on how far you want it to move, what our virtual test showed. And then we say, okay, let's get to work and do that. In Justin's case, his race is in just 5 minutes now, which is right around the corner. Good news is he's already been training a ton. And so that's what I did, was I went back and said, let me take a look at what he did last year. So we got his data from Strava, sucked that out and took a look at it and said, how did he perform across?
Technically, it wasn't last year. Last year, a truck took me out of the ability to enter into the loaders. That was actually from 2014.
Oh,
wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
That explains why you stopped, and then you went 65 miles an hour and straight to a hospital. I said, okay. I was wondering. I was gonna flag you.
Max speed of 65 was on flat.
Well, they can't go any faster. You're so tall. I know they can't close the doors in the back of the ambulance. Right. So in that case, just to get back to what you're really asking, is that so we have to say what kind of adaptations can we see in such a short period of time, right?
Right.
As I think doing some of that VLA max work is important. Justin's strong, and he can turn a low gear and be really effective at it. It's not something he would normally do. So it's okay for him to get into that space and become comfortable with it. He already has the high end power. So that if someone surges for 20, 30 seconds, he's got check. He's like, try again, don't try again, right? So that's fine. So in the short term window, I'd say doing some more of that lower VO2 number. So in those key metrics, he's got, let me go back to that document there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the first page has got a VO2 range, Jason.
Right, it's got a VO2 range, right? So 446 to 491. And so I would say spending a lot more time closer to that 446 number, doing 4 or 5 minute intervals, that's going to really challenge him. The short sprint stuff is fine. But that's going to be a way for him to kind of, if he's looking to do some of that work here as part of his peak, that would be the work that I would be doing. We don't need to work really anymore on his strengths on that high end side. We need to make sure that he's going to be able to get to the end of that race and be able to put out the watts he needs to be successful. He's already, knows the course, knows how it typically plays out, can sustain definitely, decent power on the hills. So that's not what's going to get him. It's just the overall fatigue that's in that.
Right. So his ability to repeat these long, essentially max aerobic efforts, are classic 5 to 5 ratios. You're talking about that sort of thing. Is that kind of the parallel things that we're looking at that customized zone that he needs?
Yes. So definitely, yeah. So that higher end zone, and I would go a step further. So I would say, what INSCYD shows us. I mean, there's so much information, and some of it we have that we're still working on behind the scenes. Not really, wouldn't want to sort of share it out too early, but some of it they show a great deal with the lactate shuttling workout you've done, for example, right? So we know that you can do lactate shuttling and not only build lactate from work, but then also recover. And so, well, what if we use that the inverse strategy and say, hey, let's actually put Justin kind of in the hurt locker. We're gonna do a 5 minute interval.
How come every time you start prescribing stuff, it starts with let's put Justin in the hurt locker? I sense a trend.
That is,
by the way, I just trademarked that. Sorry.
Yeah, Justin.
Dang it, it was going to be on the next ODZ t-shirt.
There you go. All morning, everyone was like, hey, you're going to get Justin's results. All we need to know is how many watts do all of us need to put together so we could put him in the hurt locker. All morning. That's all they wanted to know. I'm like, yeah, right. 5 minutes at 446.
Go for it. That is not Justin's happy place. Right, exactly. You can get creative with that level of work. So for him, again, like let's say he did not take the test, he was just training, and he's like, I got my typical taper. This is what I do. Naturally, athletes sort of gravitate to 2 things. Like one is, what are their strengths? Like they're like, am I still good? I'm still good. Okay, I'm still good, right? They'll do stuff that's comfortable, easy, and that they're strong at. People will also typically go back and say, man, in 2014, I had a great race. What the heck was I doing in September of 2014? He was like, oh, I just discovered that, I don't know, they made peach salsa here locally in town. I'm going to go eat a bunch of peach salsa. Like all that sort of random stuff that athletes do. It's like, has no bearing on your performance, but you feel better. And so what's great about this data is we can say, hey, where are you right now and where do you want to be? So I think in Justin's case, for the long race that he's considering, I think his VLA max isn't in a bad place at all. He's kind of just on the upper end of an all-rounder. So he can, he's just a little low on the steady state watts. Like if someone decides to go for 40 minutes at a sustained effort, he'd be like, that's going to be a little bit of work. But 20, 25 minutes, he's golden. And he can still put the work in, So I would say it's more just kind of fine-tuning a little bit for him.
Right. So it's about him getting that right workout in. And using some of the numbers that he's getting here. I think one other number before I want to make sure that we hit this because this is a really important metric that we get from INSCYD, which is the recovery number. And that's where this plays in with him building his VO2 max workouts and him being able to kind of play with this, like you're talking about, this inversion of how much work are we getting done and how quickly are we creating lactate and how quickly are we clearing that and this number that's now defined versus this random number that we're just trying to recover and like not pedal, let's say.
Yes, exactly. Right. So in this case, and this is, hold on a second, I got to make sure I need to plug my computer in. I don't have my,
oh, I have a picture of it, or I have the graph if we need for the LOP. Oh, you're dying. That I can't help. Sorry. So I guess we'll give him a chance to kind of do that. Do you need to grab a power cable? I can bring Justin in here for a minute from chat if you need to grab a power cable.
Yeah, why don't you go do that? I'll go grab that cable so we're good, because I want to go back to that recovery number.
Sounds good. Okay. So far in this week, Justin, where do you feel with the knowledge that you have, where has it changed kind of what you've been doing just this week? Kind of knowledge-wise, kind of an understanding-wise, what has changed this week for you?
Well, I think it's kind of been like my mind's been hitting all the things. Like there's so much new knowledge here, and there's so many different ways of thinking about potentially training that I kind of feel like I'm like all over the map. Like, hey, we're gonna try to drop my endurance zone to my fat max burn, because that it's no longer endurance, it's fat max. So we're gonna go a little bit easier. And then I was like, oh, we don't have a lot of time, so like we got to go up to like tempo. So like, all right, well, let's just do 2 hours tempo low cadence. Like, let's see what that's like. Let's do that. And then it was like, okay. And then like, I honestly today would have probably, I thought about maybe trying to do some more of that VO2 work, but it was outside and it was longer climbs. So I haven't looked at what my average power was on the climbs, honestly. But I'm going to my guess is it's going to be more around like longer FTP efforts that I did for those, maybe a little above. But so honestly, I don't have like a solid, like I have a roadmap. I just don't know how to read the roadmap yet, to be frankly honest. And I'm like learning and like, okay, internalizing, because like there's just so much, there's nothing groundbreaking new, but it's just teaching it in a different way and understanding. You mean like, okay, we go to the VLA max number. It's like, okay, well, something a lot of people know, like you can train your sprint up, but it's going to come at your steady state watts, or you can train up your steady state watts and it's going to come at the expense of your sprint. Like pretty much every endurance athlete could tell you that, right? But nobody can put numbers to it to say where you're at on that scale. We just all know that intuitively, that like, if all I go do like sprint to street signs all day long, like I'm going to suck in the time trial. Right. So, so these are kind of things that like, that's something we knew. Like it's not rocket science. Like the fat max number showing that like, okay, and maybe this is right what we're getting to, like with recovery was you show how your fat burns, and then when that drops off, and then where your carb burn goes, and that comes up, and like showing how your body changes, how you get close to that threshold. It helps you understand better what your threshold is, because you understand the change in fuel sources. But then it also kind of shows you this is like your strength. That's where your max recovery number comes from, is because where you're basically using just pure fats, right? You're not needing any carbs to recover. So P-Mac's back. He's got his charger. Why don't we segue into that? His answer on the recovery there.
Totally.
So.
I'll do that. Yeah. Sorry. So so part of what that one of the inside charts will show you is actually the point at which you combust the most lactate. So when your body is just chewing through, so you go out and earn lactate in an interval or in a race, you've got all this lactate in your system. Lactate it's fuel, right? And so it accumulates, your body can use it, but we have to get rid of it so that your muscles get back to functioning regularly, so we can go accumulate more. We only got so much room, right, to hold lactate. And so that number for you is your peak. We call it inside Best Bike Camp Endurance Station, we call it your peak recovery number. So that's your number. So your job, like on race day or when you're doing intervals, or if you're in a race event, is like, I need to get back to that number as often as I can when I'm not working, because I'm just cleaning out the system, right? It's just, just pushing all of it out so you can get back to, so you're prepared for that next surge. So, one of the examples I like to give, it was a great article a couple of years back from two pro cyclists who were competing in Philly, and they had to climb that ridiculous wall. And I want to say they did like 15 laps of that thing. And this athlete in his third year was still just trying to crack the nut. And he realized after comparing numbers and looking at everything that he was just as strong as the other rider, The issue was that he just wasn't recovering fast enough between the repeats. He wasn't doing a good enough job. So it wasn't that someone else went out and found 10% more watts. At that pointy end, there's not that much extra wattage to be had. It's just that the other athlete was better prepared and was able to go back to the well every single time. And so that number is critical for you, whether it's Crit City or when you're out in your race as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so looking at that number, so Justin, like think about when you sit in the group, the number for you is around 176 to 225. So let's say 175 to 225. Do you find yourself going that low into the zone, or would you need to purposely put yourself in a place where you got to that spot?
I feel like it's probably a little bit under. Like I'd probably naturally, honestly, like I've trained myself on Thursdays to sit at 240, like because I do it 3 hours every Thursday. So I probably trend to that. I haven't honestly like analyzed sitting in the bunch that much, but it also depends on like what the bunch is doing, what my teammates are doing. Like obviously cycling races are very, very dynamic, and they change instant by instant depending on who's what team dynamics. And so like, there could be times where, my job was to set the false flat on the front, and it was somewhere around that number, and I just did it, and that was great. My teammates went up the road. I probably set it for too long because then I got destroyed when everyone else decided they should go fast. But my teammates were really far up the road, so whatever, who cares? So I don't have a straight answer to that really, but and it's kind of hard to be like, oh, this section of the race I was just sitting in, right? Because it just changes so rapidly.
So here's a good example. So I've been trying to bring this up in conversations on Discord and asking what people do. Hey, when we go down, let's say I was doing commentary for the team time trial. We're going up the Volcano KOM. We're looking at anywhere from 6 to 8 minutes depending on the team, right? What do you do on that turnaround, right? What do most riders do? They tuck in and they roll down. Coach P, inside riders, you're going to go straight to 225. As soon as you catch your breath, I mean, there's going to be that moment, you're going to roll over, you're going to catch your breath, you get under control. Inside rider is going to go straight to 225 because you know what you're going to do at 225? You're going to be the most efficient at dropping all that lactate you just did for the last 8 minutes. And that's where that number is important, right? And so
that goes straight back to why you don't just stop a workout at the end. Like you don't go straight from a sprint to laying on the ground. Although Sufferfest tells people to do that. I don't know. It's questionable that they got that 1 minute interval where they tell you to lay down. I think they're full of it. You got to spin it out. Everyone knows you got to spin it out. The body's got to clear it.
Sounds good. Yeah. So as we circle back, so for Justin, we want him working on longer aerobic max efforts to really stack them. And maybe he doesn't fully recover. Maybe he digs in the well and doesn't recover all the way and digs deeper and kind of does this stepwise process.
You guys are breaking up. I can't hear what you're saying. This sounds terrible.
It's okay. Everything has been
bad in the
yeah. So that may be a way to kind of really kind of dig it deep. So I was trying to think. Oh, okay. So then if it was in a longer section, obviously you're saying we'd want to like a VLA block, maybe bring him down and then kind of bring him back from there and then taper up. So what we're looking at is almost like a race, race specialty prep for him because he's 5 weeks out or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
So I guess going back to the beginning, how does this test and these results get utilized when you get riders to your events at for Endurance Nation for their bike camp?
Totally. Right. So we do the same thing. So we run the same test that Justin took it like everyone else. And then we break it out each week. So in the first week's all about VLA Max. And we talk a great deal about what the science is behind it. We put people through test workouts. So they understand it. We give them homework, essentially, go back and take a look at like, what was the low cadence for you? Where are you at? Because for some people, this is just totally new stuff for them. Right? They've been told all their life, my cadence has to be 90, right? Like I always have to be 90. Now what? So you forget. Like I think sometimes when we're talking to someone, we know them who they are as an athlete, but we don't necessarily know their understanding. So going through this on a more longer term scale is actually really helpful to understand more than just like Justin said, giving them a piece of paper. That's week one. Week two is peak recovery stuff we're talking about right now. We'll do it in workouts. We do it in Zwift races together as a community. We'll get people's feedback on just what Justin said. Is that number a number you can get to? Is it comfortable? when does it work? What type of races and where doesn't it work, right? Like Crit City, for some athletes, they really struggle, right? Trying to get to that number. They only get like 5 seconds, right? Not enough. That's the nature of the race, right? Week 3, we talk about fat max, carb max, better understanding of fueling. So athletes can understand, sort of what their power is, what their power could be if they were properly fueling. I don't know what Justin typically consumed.
I eat fig bars. Everyone knows that.
When they're available and the kids haven't eaten them yet, right?
Yeah, well, my kids haven't stolen them off the workout bench.
Yeah, right. And then the last week is the customization piece. You got to dive back in. We say, now we know all these things about you, where you're at, which part are you excited about? Where do you want to go? How much time do you have to your race? And we can do it. So for us, our first class that went through, we gave most of them a 12-week block, right? So they, some of them, like they fall in different quadrants, right? And we have a sort of inside best bike camp, we've got some quadrants. So some people need to just raise the VO2. Some people just need to lower the VLA. Some people need to do both. So there's different homework assignments based on where you are specifically in that space, right? Because some of the work is actually oppositional to each other, right? So we can't increase VO2 and reduce VLA at the same time unless we're 2%. So we kind of go through all that process. So it's actually kind of neat for athletes to go through.
Absolutely. Great. Justin, were there any questions that we didn't hit that you wanted to ask Coach P while we have him on that had to do with this? Because I know you have other questions.
So why can't you sprint again? That was the main. I mean, I know the numbers show it, but I just wanted to hear it from your mouth.
Yeah. I was so funny. I went back and watched, and I was like, what does Justin do differently when he's on a bicycle that yields all these watts? See it. Couldn't see it. Nope. I feel the same way.
The pedals still go over just like all of our other bikes, right? The pedal just turn.
Right.
So, all right.
I think I do want to say just real quickly. I think for people who are, especially with ODZ being so engaged on Zwift, I think a lot of you out there who are listening kind of know that there's events that you do well at, right? When you go look at your results, you're like, man, when I do these, hour-long or 90-minute races or 60-mile races, whatever, these are great. Like I'm still in the mix. I'm in the top 10 at the end, and I'm kind of vying for it. Or if it's like I got to do 20-minute races, or I prefer hilly. Like people know hilly flat, but I would look also at the duration and how competitive you are. And if you end up being more competitive at that longer event, then you probably have a lower VLA max number, right? You're able to do more aerobic work, still save some energy for the end. For athletes who are really successful at those short sprint races, or like Justin, basically chat and then play with us all and then just destroy us in like one fell swoop, you get that higher. So I think the thing that Zwift isn't asking you is like, this is where you are, but is that where you want to be? And that's what's really neat about the test. Say, oh, hey, this is good, but you could be better. Like in Justin's case, he's only at like 70% capacity there as threshold in terms of his VO2. It's like, wow, that's why those longer intervals are important for him. We talk about fitness as a house. We talk about VO2 is the roof of the house and FTP is the ceiling. Justin's got a huge attic. He's got all sorts. He's got his whole setup in there. Tons of foot bars.
We know there's lots of space up here. We know.
Yeah, we need to keep that ceiling up. He's gonna get that bad boy up there.
Raise the roof. That's what I learned in school. Raise the roof.
Nice.
So, anyway.
I do want to be respectful of Coach P's time, but if you don't mind, we do have one question that's kind of repeated here in the comments today, and it's specifically, I think the topic's going to be LOP. But it's going to be, I don't understand that the point that you're trying to recover quickly at this higher wattage of this 225. Is it that you're trying to clear it at that
That's
watts?
mine, not everyone. Let's be clear about that. That's not everyone's number.
Right. Or is it trying to get performance and still getting recovery? Like just maybe, I think if an explanation of kind of clearing the lactate, I think could help clear that question up.
Right. All right, so I'll do 2 sets. So one is like a workout. Like if we all did a 30-30 workout, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, and we do 2 sets of 8 minutes, just like that, right? Some people do it, and they're like, "Oh, it's pretty good." Like my numbers were consistent, right? For some people, the first 6 are good, and and then if they fall off a cliff, right? Some people struggle. You could say that some folks are more predisposed to doing that type of work, like Justin, but you can get better at doing that type of work if you spend your time in the recoveries, in that recovery zone, processing what you've built up, right? So not just wallowing in it. Like a lot of people recover, like they'll sprint, like Justin said, and then they'll walk, right? Sprint and walk. And what we're learning here is that that's not the optimal way. We need to keep those muscles turning So we chew through that lactate so we can be successful at it. So on one sense, it just kind of shows you like, hey, if you're suffering the workout, do this. From a utilization perspective, I would say it just means you could do more work. Like imagine if you weren't dying after 6 intervals, if you could get to like 14, maybe we could do 3 or 4 more intervals. Like being in that recovery zone will let you do more work, get more bang for your buck out of your training. And it's a learn. Sorry.
I think maybe the question that Andy's asking you really is, so what is the difference between, let's say, 10, 20, 30 watts and whatever your recovery numbers, right? Like pretty much like you're just like moving your legs. And obviously at this recovery number, you are putting in some work, right? So what's the benefit for me, right? I think that's kind of where it's coming from.
So Coach B, let me put his LOP chart up, and then you could refer to kind of at 100 watts versus his maximum. Would that help? Oh, looks like he might have gotten.
Oh,
there you go. There you go. Okay, cool. Yeah, so maybe we could use his LOP chart, and you can kind of explain the curve here for him.
Oh, okay. Do you have that up on the screen? Or
I do. So like, yeah, so he's at 221. He's got the 0.5, what is it? 0.57-ish LOP clearance, right?
It's my side-by-side lack of pyruvate, fat and carbohydrate with the with your virtual analysis put on. That's what we're showing on the screen. And I think we're talking specifically about the lack of pyruvate on the left.
Oh, I see. Okay, well, scroll up a little bit. Go up to that. It's a more blown up chart just above it. It's got the lines on it. Like
I got it.
Yes. So lack of pyruvate, lactate accumulation. Yes.
Yeah, so it's that same chart. We just kind of pulled it out. So we look at it a little differently like this. So in this case, this gets to that lactate shuttling piece. So in Justin's case, we know he can do a minute at about 3 because the software lets us be dynamic in there with scrolling and cursor. So we can see that for Justin, he can ride 379 watts for a minute and do 225 for a minute and kind of cruise, right? He's not going to ever accumulate lactate to the point where he's really suffering. He'll have normal degradation from fatigue, but it's not going to incapacitate him, right? And that extends out. So if he were to do 408 watts for a minute, he needs 2 minutes at recovery zone, right? So the higher the effort, and it goes up exponentially, that lactate accumulation is totally exponential. And so in that case, you see more time in that recovery zone. So the more work you do, the more recovery you need. And so what this kind of gives Justin, and for anyone who gets this test, sees the number, it gives you an ideal target where at that number, that peak of the blue line, right under the 225, that's where we are your body's just chewing up all that lactate. So we're just clearing it out of your system. So again, if you're doing intervals and you're trying to do better intervals, this is a chance for you to be able to extend that work and ultimately train your body to get good at processing that. It becomes a skill over time. You become comfortable with what that is. It's kind of like your new normal. And it allows you to be, I think it's going to make people a much more effective racer, right? I think most people when they race in Zwift have like an on-off piece. They're like, oh my God, they're attacking, whatever it takes, hang on to a wheel. And then like, oh, I think we're good. Now I will stop. Like, oh, dear sweet Jesus. Like what happened? Like, where's all my stuff? Like I've got drool on my face. I've knocked all my stuff over, like what's happened? And then you're like, oh my God, someone's sprinting again. And it becomes this, sort of bag over the head, getting punched scenario. And this whole piece here says, you know what? Let's put you into that optimal recovery zone right away. So when somebody does attack or you're in that longer event, hey, this is fantastic. Like I can still stay in the zone. So for me, for example, dynamic race situation, somebody attacks, I'm trying to bridge back up to make it in. We settle down. My job is to be in the center of that pack. And if I can, shift to make it a little bit easier and get my watts right down to my recovery zone. So I can just start processing stuff and see how long I'll remain in the blob. Those watts may not keep me in there. I may start drifting to the back. I got to pick it up again. I'll drift to the back, but I'm trying to sit in, right? I don't want to be on the front of that race doing all that work because I'm not going to be able to process what I did. So it gives you a good marker. So that chart's great because you could say, oh my God, because it's Zwift, I prefer watts per kilo. In that case, it'd be like, oh man, if you're doing a minute at 4.5, Justin, then you need a minute off to be totally good. If you get 20 seconds or 30 seconds, you're halfway there, but it's better than 0 seconds or just coasting.
There you go.
So I think it's that range.
So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Obviously, digging a little bit deeper into this and trying it yourself. I think this is where, the notation of active recovery has come to note, but this now puts a quantitative number to that allows you to get
and a reason,
excess.
right? It has to do with the burn, right? Burning fat versus burning carbs. Like for me, like, okay, there was a number, like there's always this nebulous zone that was some magical percentage of my FTP, but this is now like, okay, we're showing you why, right? Because you're seeing the fat burn chart, the carb burn chart. Okay, and now I see, I mean, that's probably behind the scenes why they picked those zones, because they knew all this, but they were like, all right, but like software can only do percentages of FTP. So let's just kind of boil it down to that, right? Like, cause that's, but so yeah, it's great stuff. I'm eating it up. I'm loving it. So
Absolutely. Cool. So I think that will round us up. I want to thank Coach P for his time and give him the opportunity to plug where you can get in touch with him. If you're interested in learning more about INSCYD, you could reach them at INSCYD.com. There's got some great podcasts if you want to learn about it. Sebastian Weber is amazing. He's got an awesome accent. You can listen to him all day. Super fun. But Coach P, where can people reach out to you if they want to chat with you about what you do?
Totally. So just head to our website, endurancenation.us. We've got a chat widget there. You can just reach out and ask your questions right away, or find us on our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/endurancenation. You go to endurancenation.us, Best Bike Camp is right there. Or if you go to bestbikecamp.com, it'll also take you there as well. And you can learn about the test. There's a video on there kind of explaining what we do. And it lets you know, I think the next session we're going to do is October. So there's opportunity to sign up for that.
Awesome. And if you're free on Thursday mornings, you can find him at the back of Wagner's Wagon. He's available as well.
Yes, I am.
He's scooping up all the juice boxes, trying to mute the dad jokes for the entire wagon on Twitch.
Exactly. If you're having a bad week, show up, just make fun of me. A couple of hours, you'll just be much better.
All right. I want to thank everybody who showed up.
He just has auto responses. He just has like an auto LOL response. Anytime I say something, he just assumes I'm like making fun of him, and it's just his bot just says LOL, LOL, ha ha ha. Meanwhile, he's not even paying attention.
All right. I want to thank everybody who tuned in tonight. John Stoker, Kev Steffen, thanks for jumping in. Andy, thanks for helping out with the shares and the links. Hope we answered some of your questions there. And everyone else that came in, we want to thank you for your time. Coach P, Justin, thank you for your time. And for everyone else, check us out on TeamODZ.com or EnduranceLab.fit. And you can always check out EnduranceNation.us. We'll see you on the next live stream. Thanks again, everybody.